Welcome to the 2026 AAAS annual meeting, Sci-Mic Stage, supported by the George Washington University, being presented in person and streaming online. I am your host, Jessica Hubbard, and I'm here with our second interviewee of the night, Molly Hanlon, who is a senior research scientist at the Danforth Plant Science Center. Welcome to the Sci-Mic Stage.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to start off, and I mentioned this in the last interview, with what I seem to see as an easy question. Tell me a little bit about what you do.
So, like you said, I'm a senior research scientist at the Danforth Plant Science Center, and that's a nonprofit research center focused solely on plant science. There, I largely work on roots. It's a little weird. I think if I had told myself 20 years ago I was doing this, I would kind of look a little funny. But I study roots because they're incredibly important. So roots, obviously, plants need roots to grow. Roots acquire all water and mineral nutrients that plants need. Roots also link our atmosphere kind of to the below ground ecosphere, to soil. And they serve as this nexus where all the carbon that's fixed by plants is introduced into the soil. Roots turned rocks into soil and gave us the soil that we have, that kind of our society is built upon, that allows agriculture to thrive, all of these things. So I think roots are super important because of that, and because they're fun and cool to look at.
I will say, I think roots are really cool. I did think that before this interview. Whenever I'm working on my houseplants, I feel like that's the one thing that I'm always trying to have to keep a close eye on. So your session, or your research talk, is tomorrow, correct? Can you tell me, or give our listeners a little bit of a preview about what you'll be discussing?
Yeah, so our session is tomorrow at 10 a.m., I believe, and it's getting to the root of plant health. And we have a group of great scientists who try to answer those questions about how roots grow through and interact with soil. And I think you'll see tomorrow as people talk, there's a lot of technology that goes into this, right? Roots, you can't see roots unless you take them out of the pot, right? And then you can see them, or you dig them out of the ground, which I've done thousands of times. Otherwise, you can't see what they're doing. You can't understand how they're experiencing that environment, how they're interacting with that environment, how they're changing that environment. So I think what you'll see tomorrow is a display of some of those tools and technologies and really advanced approaches that people are using to see these roots, which we otherwise can't see.
It sounds really exciting to think of the technological ways to see something that's covered all the time, right? But that isn't probably the only thing that excites you about your work, right? What other
pretty exciting,
right?
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
What else has motivated you to do this line of work?
Yeah, so about 3 years ago, I moved to the Danforth Center, and when I got there, I started working on perennial plants, so plants that grow year after year. And when we think of perennials, we often think of trees, right? Trees stick around for a long time, but there are also herbaceous perennial plants, so non-woody perennial plants. Those were never really domesticated for agriculture. They're plants that exist naturally, but they were never really bred. So we think of plants as kind of corn or a soybean, right? Those are annual plants, or we can think of trees. But I started working on these herbaceous perennial plants, and it's largely inspired by the landscape that used to dominate what is now agricultural land in the Midwest of the U.S. So that land used to be kind of tall grass prairies or short grass prairies, depending where you are. So these large swaths of land of mixed species of plants that grow together for a long time and really foster a diverse ecosystem of plants, of animals, of micro and macro fauna, of all sorts of things. And those plants built that soil that we now grow our crops on. But I started working on these plants as kind of a tool for restoration, thinking about restoring both agricultural ecosystems and ecological systems as the impact. But I started working on them because they're just super cool. Like, how do these things keep living? How do they put up with everything that's going on around them? How are they resilient to these changes over time? And they just keep going. So that really excites me.
I love the idea of thinking of just their resilience being inspiring, if that's not a weird phrase.
In these times, we have to look to something, yeah.
Right. So what would you say to someone who is who loves plants and wants to get into this line of work, what advice do you have for students, since we have a lot of students who are attending this conference?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say loving plants is the necessary prerequisite. I was not a plant lover.
Interesting.
I had chores around my house growing up that were taking care of the plants. So I decided I didn't want to study plants. But then I got into it and I really liked it. It's fun science. We can control a lot. We can test a lot. We can manipulate a lot. And we can go outside and be inspired. So I think, wanting to study plants is maybe not the goal everyone needs to have. It's learning, technologies, learning tools, learning how to be a scientist, learning how to ask questions, and then understand what those pressing questions are that we face. And I think looking at our agricultural and ecological ecosystems and seeing the degradation and problems presented because of climate change, you can apply a lot of tools that you might pick up elsewhere to these systems. So I think it's important to kind of take a broad approach and look at plants as a fun way to figure things out about the world and maybe solve some of these big problems. But I think the biggest thing is just staying curious. And I think, I came here today from St. Louis, and it's so different here. And I look at the plants, right? And it's like, oh, these trees, these plants, they're so different. Everything is so different. And that's exciting. And it's just a curiosity. Why are they growing here? How are they growing here? And I think leveraging that curiosity is what can move us forward.
Leveraging curiosity. I love that line. And then walking outside to be inspired. I studied atmospheric science, so walking outside, looking at the clouds was what got me into science. So it's also interesting to hear the kind of the opposite of the story, right? So I like to end the interview with a little bit of a funner question, or a little bit of a different topic. What are you reading right now, or any interesting any books that you would recommend?
Yeah, other than papers, I'm reading right now. I started reading on my way here a book. It's called Unexploded Ordnance. And it's a book that was actually written by my undergraduate advisor, who's a botanist and a plant physiologist. But she always loved writing, and she decided to write this book. It's a work of essays, mostly, largely nonfiction, based on kind of her life, but her life as part of her family. So she immigrated to the U.S. for graduate school. She's German, and her family is German. And she talks a lot about the stories of what it was like for the women in her family, her grandmother and her mother, to grow up in post-war Germany, and kind of the toll that took on their lives and how that shaped her life. And it's a lot of reflection. And I think it's really good. I think, I have obviously a personal connection to it. And my undergraduate advisor is someone who's incredibly important to me. Her name's Katerina Konen. And I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't probably be a scientist if it weren't for her. I was pre-med in college, and I thought I would go to medical school. And I was a lifeguard at the time. My mom's like, if you want to go to medical school, you have to get a job in a lab. So I kind of went around knocking on doors, and I got a job as a dishwasher, and I just kept showing up, and I just kept showing up. And then they had to culture some mycorrhizal fungi, which can be kind of a tricky task. But I would come to the lab after swim practice every morning, so I was freshly chlorinated and had effectively probably killed the microbiome on my skin, so I could maintain these sterile cultures, which was a task that the lab had been having a hard time with for years. So I did that, and I just kept showing up, and I got really into it. And I think she saw this in me before I saw it in myself, because I was applying to medical school, and I decided I didn't want to do it. And I went to her office, and I said, I don't think I want to do this. And she said, I knew that, but I needed you to figure it out. So I think those people, those mentors, they really shape us into who we are. And I think, reading this book that she had written, it's like, these people are special in our lives.
Right, and that was touched upon in the plenary, too, about how someone in your earlier educational career can really have an impact. And I think there's so many stories similar to that, so I really appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you.
Is there, I know I said that was the final question. I should frame this as final then. Is there any final thoughts that you would like to leave with listeners on the first night of the annual meeting?
Not really. It's my first time at the meeting.
Same.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what it's all about and to learn and to interact. If you want to talk about plants or soil or roots, come find me because I'm always up to talking about those things.
It's been wonderful talking with you, Molly. I really appreciate you joining me on the SciMike stage tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.